Before the story begins, please drop a comment letting us know what part of the country or the world you're tuning in from. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so this channel can keep growing and bring you even more compelling stories. It was 11:10 p.m. My husband slapped me because dinner wasn't on the table. He screamed, "Get in there and cook, you useless woman." I remained silent and walked into the kitchen for 20 minutes. When I returned with a covered platter, they thought it was a delicious meal, but when I lifted the lid, the contents were not food, but a one-way ticket to their own personal hell on earth. The grandfather clock in the living room read 11:10 p.m. Outside, the street was submerged in a deep silence, broken only by the soft hum of my car's tires on the garage floor. My body ached. I had spent the entire day at the office, wrestling with mountains of audit reports that had to be ready by the next morning. My head throbbed with a piercing pain, as if a hammer were striking it again and again. Still, I forced a faint smile onto my face, imagining the soft bed that awaited me. All I wanted was a hot shower and an uninterrupted night's sleep. I killed the engine and trudged toward the front door. The house keys jingled in my hand, which trembled slightly from exhaustion. As I opened the door, a blast of cold air from the central AC hit me. Strange. Normally, the living room lights were off by this hour, but tonight, the whole space was brightly illuminated. A bad feeling suddenly crept over me. My steps froze at the threshold when I saw 3 people sitting on the living room sofa, their expressions unreadable. Michael, my husband, sat in the center, his legs crossed arrogantly. To his right was Brenda, my mother-in-law, staring at me with sharp, accusatory eyes. To his left, Jessica, my sister-in-law, was scrolling on her phone, though she occasionally shot me a look with a cynical smirk. Before I could even say hello, Michael leaped to his feet and strode toward me. His face was red with rage, his jaw clenched tight. I could see the veins in his neck bulging, a clear sign he was about to explode. "Honey, I just got home," I started to say. I never finished the sentence. A hard slap landed squarely on my left cheek. The sound was so sharp it shattered the nightly silence of the living room. A searing sting and intense heat immediately spread across my face. My head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. I was paralyzed. The exhaustion I had felt moments before seemed to vanish, replaced by an overwhelming shock. My right hand trembled as I touched my cheek, which was already starting to feel numb. I looked at Michael, trying to find a hint of remorse in his eyes, but there was nothing, only the glint of explosive fury. "Have you seen what time it is, you cheap tramp?" Michael yelled, his face inches from mine. His spit sprayed onto my blouse. "Who do you think you are, coming home at this hour? Out partying while your husband is at home." I fought back the tears that were welling up. "Michael, I've been working overtime. You know it's the end of the quarter. I have a ton of work. Besides, I texted you this afternoon," I replied, my voice trembling but striving to remain calm. I didn't want to appear weak in front of them. "Excuses," Brenda interrupted in her shrill voice. She got up from the sofa and pointed a finger at my face. "What kind of wife are you? We've been sitting here for an hour, starving. There's nothing on the table. The pots are empty. The fridge is empty, except for cold water. Are you trying to starve your husband and me to death?" Jessica chimed in without looking up from her phone screen, as if I were less important than her social media feed. "A little self-awareness, Emily. Michael's tired from being home all day. The least a wife can do when she gets home from work is bring food or cook, not come back empty-handed. So useless." I looked at them, one by one. Michael, unemployed for 6 months after being fired for embezzling company funds, though he always told the neighbors he was starting his own business. Brenda, who asked me for thousands of dollars every month for her expenses and lunches with her socialite friends, but couldn't be bothered to clear a single dirty dish in this house. And Jessica, a 5-year-old whose only job was to sleep, eat, and shop online with the additional credit card I provided. All of them lived off my hard work. All of them breathed under the roof of a house whose mortgage I paid every single month. And now they were screaming at me for being late to cook them dinner. "Get in the kitchen! Now!" Michael roared again, this time shoving me hard by the shoulder. I stumbled back, crashing into the shoe rack. "And don't come out until there's a decent meal on that table. And be warned, If it's not good, I'll smash the plate in your face." I took a deep breath, trying to stifle the rage that was beginning to burn in my chest. I wanted to scream, to vomit all the frustration I had bottled up for so long. I wanted to throw them out of my house that very instant. But no, rage would only ruin my plan. I needed to be calm to pay them back in the most painful way possible, an elegant revenge they would never forget. I straightened up and smoothed my clothes. I looked Michael directly in the eye. There was no longer fear or sadness in my gaze, only a cold emptiness. "All right," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm going to prepare a special dish for you all, the one you deserve most tonight." Without waiting for a reply, I walked past Michael, ignoring Brenda's look of contempt and Jessica's mocking laugh. I walked straight to the kitchen, the place where I usually spent hours serving them like a maid. But tonight would be different. Tonight, no aroma of a delicious meal would emerge from this kitchen. Tonight, this kitchen would become the place where I prepared their ruin. Once inside, I shut the door firmly. I leaned my back against it and closed my eyes for a moment to gather my strength. The sting on my cheek was still there, but the pain in my heart was far more unbearable. During our 5 years of marriage, I had always tried to be a devoted wife. I turned a blind eye to Michael's laziness. I endured Brenda's criticism and gave in to Jessica's whims. I thought that with patience, they would change. How wrong I was. My patience had only fed the monsters within them. They grew greedier, crueler, more shameless. I opened my eyes. The tears I had held back were gone. It wasn't worth crying over parasites like them. I went to a drawer in a corner of the kitchen where I kept important things I had been hiding. Enough was enough. This family drama had to end tonight. The sound of a knife hitting a cutting board echoed loudly. Chop, chop, chop. The rhythm filled the kitchen, penetrating the walls and reaching the living room. I knew exactly what they were thinking out there. They were surely smiling, feeling victorious for having bent my will once more. They must have thought the foolish, scared wife was hurriedly chopping onions or meat to satisfy their pampered stomachs. But on the kitchen counter, there wasn't a single ingredient. The large chef's knife was just hitting the empty wooden board, over and over. It was part of the show. I wanted them to feel on top of the world before I cast them into the deepest abyss. While I kept up the fake noise, my other hand was busy preparing the real dish. I took out a large silver platter we normally only used for Thanksgiving or major family celebrations. The platter gleamed under the kitchen lights. I didn't place any plates of rice or casserole on it. There was no pot roast, no chicken soup, no stir-fried vegetables, which were what they usually demanded. Instead, I pulled a thick folder from a secret drawer under the sink, a folder I had been preparing for 3 months, waiting for the right moment to bring it to light. I opened it and took out 3 key documents. First, the deed to this house. The house had been purchased with my savings. However, Michael had pressured me into putting his name on it too, so he would feel valued as the head of the household. But last month, after I paid off the final mortgage payment with my annual bonus, I had secretly worked to have the title legally transferred solely into my name. The process was complicated and costly, but thankfully I had a trusted lawyer who worked quickly and without Michael ever finding out. This document was proof that every brick, every tile, and every square foot of this property belonged to me. Second, the divorce papers. The documents were already complete, with my signature notarized. They detailed all the grounds for divorce: verbal abuse, physical abuse, the kind that had just occurred and had, thankfully, been recorded by the security camera I installed in the living room last week, and financial abandonment. I was done supporting a man whose only talent was giving orders. Third, a stack of bank statements as thick as a notebook. I had highlighted in yellow every single transfer that had left my account to fund their lifestyle. Michael's car lease, Brenda's monthly allowance for her country club lunches, Jessica's credit card bills for designer bags and shoes, and even the cash for Michael's cigarettes and gas. It was all meticulously recorded. The sum was astronomical, enough to buy a small condo outright. This was irrefutable proof that I was the financial pillar of this family, not Michael. I carefully arranged the 3 documents on the platter: the deed in the center, the divorce papers to the left, and the bank statements to the right. Then I covered it all with a gleaming silver cloche. Perfect. On the outside, it looked like a fine dining experience from a 5-star restaurant. I checked my watch. Exactly 20 minutes had passed. It was time for the main event. I lifted the platter with both hands. It wasn't as heavy as the burden I had carried for all these years, yet it felt like the most beautiful weight I had ever held. I took a deep breath, composed my face into a mask of indifference, and pushed open the kitchen door. In the dining room, the three of them were already seated around the table. Their faces showed impatience, knife and fork in hand, ready to devour whatever I had prepared. Seeing me emerge with the large, covered platter, Brenda's eyes lit up. "That's more like it," she said with disdain, settling into her chair. "A wife must be diligent. It's not enough to just make money. Her husband's and mother-in-law's stomachs come first." Michael huffed, his face still sour from his earlier rage. "Took you long enough. I hope the food is worth the wait. If it's bland, get ready to cook again." Jessica even craned her neck. "What's under there, sis? It's weird that I can't smell anything. You didn't just make pasta, did you?" I didn't say a word. I placed the platter right in the center of the table with a slow, solemn movement. The sound of the silver hitting the glass tabletop silenced them for a moment. I stood at the head of the table, looking at them one by one with an expression that made Michael frown. Perhaps he noticed the drastic shift in my aura. "Go ahead," I said curtly. "This is the best dish I can offer you tonight. Eat until you're full." Impatient. Michael reached out and yanked the silver lid off. "Let's see what this—" His sentence died in his throat. The sound of the cloche being set down on the table echoed loudly in the sudden, tense silence. There was no hot steam, no appetite-whetting aroma of spices. On the platter lay only a stack of papers. Michael's eyes went wide. He squinted, trying to read the document on top. His face, once red with anger, slowly turned pale as he recognized the letterhead and the title. "What the hell is this?" His voice trembled, not with anger, but with confusion and a dawning panic. Brenda, who was farsighted, grabbed the thickest stack of papers. "Where's the food? Why are you giving us newspapers? Have you gone crazy, Emily?" But when she saw the highlighted figures on the bank statements, her eyes bulged. What is this?" Jessica, quicker on the uptake, snatched the divorce papers, scanned them, and then looked at me, her mouth agape. "Michael, Emily wants a divorce," she shrieked hysterically. The situation erupted. Michael slammed the deed down on the table. He shot to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Divorce papers? Who do you think you are to divorce me, you ungrateful wife? And this deed? Why is only your name on it? Where's mine? You tricked me." I smiled. A very sweet smile, but one that felt cold and sharp. "Eat your reality, Michael, Brenda, Jessica. Fill yourselves up by looking at those numbers. That is the amount of my money you have all been eating this whole time," I said, looking Michael dead in the eye. "This house is legally mine. The original deed has been in a bank's safe deposit box since this morning. That's just a copy, so it's useless for you to tear it up." Then I turned to Brenda, who was starting to shake as she held the bank statements. "And right this instant, I am kicking all of you out of my house." "By what right do you kick us out?" Brenda screamed, her voice so high-pitched it made my ears ring. "This is my son's house. Michael is the head of this family. You're just living here on loan." "Head of the family?" I laughed softly, a bitter sound. What head of the family supports his family with his wife's money? What head of the family allows his own mother to insult his wife? For your information, Brenda, Michael hasn't contributed a single dime to this house in over a year. Even the electricity powering that lamp above your head is paid for by me." Michael growled, his fists clenched, ready to strike me again. He started to circle the table, approaching me with the clear intent to do harm. "You bitch! Take back what you said or you'll what?" I challenged him. I didn't take a single step back. Instead, I lifted my chin, daring him. "You want to hit me again? Go ahead. The security camera in that corner already recorded your slap in the living room earlier. One more touch, and the footage will be automatically uploaded to the cloud and sent to my lawyer's phone. On top of the divorce papers, do you want to add a criminal complaint for domestic violence?" Michael stopped dead in his tracks. He looked up and saw the small camera with a blinking red light in the corner of the room. His face contorted into a mixture of fear and deep hatred. He realized he had walked right into my trap. "Get out," I said coldly. The silence my threat had created lasted only a few seconds before it shattered into 1,000 pieces, becoming a deafening uproar. Brenda was the first to lose control. The old woman, who normally took such care of her image as an elegant lady in front of her friends, was now howling like a banshee. She swept all the papers off the table with her wrinkled hands, scattering them across the floor. Her face was drenched in tears of rage, not sadness. Her pride was crushed by the daughter-in-law she had always considered little more than a walking ATM. She couldn't accept the reality that the luxury she enjoyed was about to vanish in an instant. Brenda slammed her palms on the dining table again and again. Her voice was hoarse as she screamed accusations at me, calling me a con artist. She claimed I had manipulated Michael, used black magic, or tricked her son in a moment of weakness to seize his assets. Her accusations were laughable. How could I trick Michael out of his assets when he had none to begin with? Everything in this house, from the silverware to the car in the garage, had been bought with my own hard-earned money. But logic didn't seem to apply to those panicking at the loss of their lifeline. Michael, who had been frozen by the camera's threat, now paced back and forth in the dining room like a caged animal. He ran his hands through his hair in frustration, his wild eyes searching for an escape, a way to turn the situation around. He picked up the copy of the deed from the floor, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it at me. The impact was soft, barely bouncing off my shoulder, but it demonstrated how powerless he felt. He knew he had no legal ground to stand on. The documents were authentic, the bank statements were real, and he knew full well he had been living off my money this whole time. Jessica, my spoiled sister-in-law, reacted differently, but just as irritatingly. She didn't scream or rage. Instead, she burst into hysterical sobs, clutching the designer handbag she had bought last week with my credit card, of course. She begged her brother to do something, terrified of being homeless, of not being able to show off on social media anymore, of her friends finding out she wasn't actually rich. Her pathetic wailing gave me a headache, but at the same time, it brought a strange satisfaction. Finally, that girl was feeling the fear of the future, the same fear that had tormented me every time I saw her credit card statements. I let them vent for a few minutes. I stood motionless at the head of the table, arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle of the destruction of a family of parasites. When I decided it had been enough, I walked to a corner of the room where I had hidden something behind the long drapes. I pulled out 3 large black trash bags, the heavy-duty kind, filled to bursting. I dragged them to the center of the room. The sound of the plastic scraping against the tile floor made them turn. With all my strength, I threw the bags at them, one by one. Thump, thump, thump. The 3 enormous bags landed at their feet. Michael jumped back in surprise. Brenda stopped her howling, and Jessica paused her crying for a moment. They stared at the trash bags in confusion. A faint smell of mothballs escaped from them, mixed with a dusty scent. "Those are your things," I said, my tone flat and emotionless. "I packed them this afternoon while you were out shopping. Clothes, pants, shoes, and any personal items I deemed important are in there. The rest, anything I considered trash or things I bought with my money that you don't deserve to take, I've either thrown in the dumpster or put aside to sell. Don't bother going up to your rooms. They're already locked, and I've thrown away the keys. You have no access to any other part of this house except this dining room and the front door." Jessica shrieked hysterically and tore open one of the plastic bags. Its contents spilled onto the floor. Clothes wrinkled and rolled up haphazardly, several pairs of shoes piled together without their boxes, and cosmetics thrown in without a case. She cried even harder, seeing her collection of expensive clothes treated like garbage. She protested that her clothes would be ruined, but I didn't care. To me, it was just junk that needed to be cleared out of my house as soon as possible. Brenda looked at me in disbelief, as if I had just turned into a monster. She clutched her chest, faking a heart attack. She began to breathe heavily, hoping I would soften and call off the eviction. That trick used to work every time. Whenever I got angry, she would feign illness, and I would end up apologizing and taking care of her. But this time, I just looked at her coldly. I knew the results of her checkup from last month. Her heart was perfectly healthy. The only thing sick was her soul, filled with envy and spite. Michael tried to approach me again, this time with a pleading, fake tone. He lowered his voice and tried to take my hand, but I snatched it away. He started talking about our good memories, the vows we made, what the neighbors would say if we got divorced. He was trying to manipulate my feelings with his old weapons, pity and fear of public opinion. But he forgot that a woman's heart, wounded repeatedly, eventually freezes and becomes as hard as a rock. There were no cracks left for Michael to slip through. I looked at my watch. 5 minutes had passed since my ultimatum. I took my phone out of my dress pocket, tapped it a few times, and showed them the screen, which displayed the emergency call button for the gated community's security office. I looked at Michael intently, giving him one final, non-negotiable warning. My patience is gone, and I refuse to waste another minute on this cheap drama. Now, take those trash bags and drag yourselves out of my house, I ordered firmly. If you are still here in 10 seconds, I will press this button. The community security guards will come and forcibly remove you. Imagine the shame of being dragged out like thieves in front of all the neighbors. The choice is yours. Do you leave on your own 2 feet with what little dignity you have left? Or do you leave by force, with a free show for the entire neighborhood? 1, 2, 3. Michael froze. His face was ashen. He looked at me, searching my eyes for any sign of doubt, but found none. He saw only deadly seriousness. With trembling hands, he grabbed one of the large plastic bags. He yelled at Jessica to stop crying and help him carry the stuff. He also pulled on his mother's arm, who was still faking an asthma attack, to get her to stand up. They finally realized I wasn't bluffing. The queen of the house had awakened, and her orders were absolute. The front door of the house swung wide open, revealing the dense darkness of the night. A strong gust of wind swept inside, carrying with it the first drops of a rain that was beginning to fall heavily. The sky seemed to be blessing my plan to cleanse the house of all filth, as a storm broke just as they took their first step outside. The sound of distant thunder rumbled, in sync with the beat of my heart, which was pounding with adrenaline. I stood at the threshold, making sure they left with their trash bags full of their meager possessions. Michael went first, heaving a large black plastic bag over his shoulder. He looked pathetic, a far cry from the arrogant husband who had slapped me earlier. His shirt was soaked by the splattering rain, his hair plastered to his head, and his face downcast, hiding his rage and shame. Behind him, Jessica reluctantly dragged her bag, cursing under her breath every time the plastic caught on the paving stones of the walkway. Brenda walked with difficulty, carrying nothing, trying to maintain the last vestiges of her pride with her chin held high, though her body was beginning to tremble from the cold night wind. The moment Brenda's last foot crossed the threshold, I slammed the heavy oak door shut. Boom. The sound became the final punctuation mark on a dark chapter of my life. I threw the deadbolt and put on the security chain. Loud banging started from outside. Seconds later, Michael began shouting my name, then insulting me, then begging. His voice was muffled, drowned out by the sound of the rain, which was now pounding harder against the roof. I didn't flinch. I went to the front window and pulled back the curtain slightly to peek. In the yard, the 3 of them stood shivering in the cold. The rain was now a downpour, soaking them in seconds. The trash bags were dripping, looking even more miserable. Michael was still pounding on the door, hoping I would soften at the sight of their condition, but he was wrong. Seeing them drenched actually soothed the wounds in my heart. It was the instant karma they reaped for how they had treated me for years. Hadn't they often left me in the rain waiting for a cab after work while Michael took my car to go out with his friends? Now they could feel the cold water seeping into their bones. The commotion on my porch attracted the neighbors' attention. Lights started coming on in the houses on either side. Some opened their windows or stepped out onto their balconies to see what was happening. Michael, realizing he had an audience, instantly changed his tactics. He stopped insulting me and began to cry out in a pitiful tone, trying to play the victim. He shouted to the neighbors that I was a heartless wife who had thrown out her husband and sick mother-in-law in the middle of the night. He acted as if he were the wronged party, hoping public sympathy would force me to open the door. "Help! Please help us! My wife has gone crazy. My mother has a heart condition. Please, don't let us die out here," Michael yelled, pointing at the front door. Brenda, whose dramatic instincts were razor-sharp, let herself fall onto the wet porch floor, pretending to faint. Jessica knelt beside her, shaking her mother's body while wailing loudly, creating a soap opera scene. Some neighbors began to whisper. The HOA president, who lived 3 houses down, started walking over with an umbrella. I knew I couldn't just stand by and let Michael twist the facts. I grabbed my phone and called the main security gate. The phone rang twice before the deep voice of Peterson, the head of security, answered. I asked him to come to my house immediately with his team, explaining there was a public disturbance. I told him some strangers were causing a scene on my porch and disrupting the peace of the community. A few minutes later, 2 security cars appeared, their blue lights flashing. Peterson and 2 of his men got out quickly. They approached the porch where Michael's family drama was unfolding. I gathered my courage and opened the door a crack, just enough to speak to Peterson without letting Michael get in. "Officer Peterson, please remove these people," I said loudly, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain so the spying neighbors could hear. "They no longer live in this house. We have separated, and the house is my property, as stated on the deed. They are trying to break in and are causing a disturbance that is bothering the neighbors. Please escort them off the property." Michael was dumbfounded. He tried to defend himself to Peterson. "Sir, this is my house. My wife is just upset. Please, don't listen to her." But Peterson was a professional who had worked here for a long time. He knew perfectly well who paid the community and security fees on time every month. Me, not Michael. He had also seen Michael come home drunk many times or bring friends over for loud parties that the neighbors complained about. Peterson's sympathy was clearly not with Michael. "I'm sorry, Mr. Evans. Mrs. Evans is the legal owner of this home, and she has asked you to leave. Please don't cause any more trouble at this hour," Peterson said firmly, taking Michael by the arm. "We're going to escort you to the gate." Michael tried to resist, but the 2 burly guards were much stronger. Brenda, who had been pretending to be unconscious, suddenly revived and stood up, afraid of being lifted by force. They were escorted out of the yard like detainees. Michael's face was red with shame at being the center of the neighbors' attention, who were now looking at him with contempt. His wronged husband act had failed spectacularly. When they reached the gate, Michael suddenly remembered something. He stopped and turned, shouting back at me, still standing on the porch. "The car keys! Where are the car keys? My wallet and the car keys are still inside. Throw me the keys. At least let us drive away." I smirked and slowly shook my head. I took a step forward so he could see my face clearly under the porch light. "The car? What car, Michael? The black SUV?" I asked with false innocence. "For your information, the title for that car is in my name. I finished paying it off last month with my bonus, so it's my car. And the keys are hidden where you'll never find them. You have no right to that vehicle whatsoever." But I need a car. Where are we supposed to go in this rain?" Michael yelled in frustration, his voice breaking in the downpour. "That's no longer my concern," I replied coldly. "You can walk. A little exercise wouldn't hurt you. Or call a cab. Oh, wait, I forgot your wallet is inside. And all the credit cards in that wallet are secondary cards on my account. And I canceled them all from my banking app 5 minutes ago. So it's useless to you." Michael stood in stunned silence, his face as white as a ghost. He had just realized the full extent of his ruin. No house, no car, not a single penny to his name. Peterson signaled to his men to keep them moving. "Come on, sir, let's go. Don't bother Mrs. Evans anymore," the guard warned him. Michael, Brenda, and Jessica finally gave up and were led away from the luxurious house where they had lived like parasites. They trudged through the torrential rain, dragging the black trash bags that were now their only possessions. I closed the door again and locked it. The rain continued to fall hard outside, but inside my house, the atmosphere was peaceful and warm. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I had truly come home. I felt a tremendous weight lift from my shoulders. Leaning my back against the door, I let out a long sigh and smiled. Tonight, I was going to sleep deeply, very deeply. The gates of the luxurious community closed behind them, like a wall separating the comfortable life they had just left and the earthly hell that now welcomed them. The rain didn't let up. Instead, it intensified with an icy wind that chilled them to the bone. Michael, Brenda, and Jessica shivered on the side of a lonely road. There was no roof to shelter under, only a few leafy trees that actually let more water drip down on them. They looked like sewer rats washed up by a flood, wet, dirty, and miserable. The black trash bags, their only fortune, felt heavier as they filled with water through poorly tied knots. They walked aimlessly along the flooded sidewalk. The dim light of the street lamps illuminated their desperate faces. Michael checked his pants pocket for the 100th time, hoping for the miracle of a forgotten bill or a lost debit card. But there was nothing. His expensive leather wallet, with his ID, driver's license, and bank cards, was on the nightstand back home. Emily had calculated everything perfectly. Without that wallet, Michael was a nobody. He couldn't rent a hotel room, buy food, or even get a hot coffee at a diner. His identity and access to money were locked away in the house, now forbidden to him. Brenda started to become delirious from the cold. Her teeth chattered, and her lips turned blue. The woman who had always looked impeccable with her makeup now seemed old and fragile. The rain had washed away her makeup, leaving her with a frightening appearance, with black smudges under her eyes. She blamed Michael in a hoarse voice that was lost in the sound of the storm, cursing his stupidity for not knowing how to control his wife. In Brenda's twisted logic, this was all happening because Michael hadn't been tough enough in training Emily, not because they had oppressed her for years. Jessica stumbled behind them. The heel of one of her stilettos had snapped when she stepped in a crack in the sidewalk, forcing her to limp while carrying the now useless expensive shoe. They finally found a closed convenience store with an awning wide enough to provide some shelter. Without a word, they collapsed, exhausted, onto the cold, dusty tile floor. Michael leaned his back against the cold metal security gate. His stomach roared loudly. Hunger was beginning to set in brutally. The last time they had eaten was at noon, and tonight they had been expecting the feast Emily would prepare. Ironically, they had received an unforgettable dish, though it wasn't edible. The image of a hot plate of food now danced in his mind, slowly torturing him. Jessica took out her phone, its screen slightly cracked from being banged around while dragging the trash bag. She tried to call for an Uber with the 10% battery she had left. However, her finger froze when she realized the payment method in the app was linked directly to Emily's supplementary credit card. With trembling hands, she tried to book a ride anyway, and sure enough, a notification popped up. Transaction failed. Emily had blocked everything. Jessica then tried calling her high society friends, hoping one would help. The first call went unanswered. The second was declined. The third was answered by a friend named Sarah. But as soon as Jessica explained she'd been kicked out and needed money, Sarah made an excuse about bad reception and hung up. Jessica smashed her phone on the ground in frustration and burst into tears, hugging her knees. That night felt terribly long and torturous. They couldn't sleep. Mosquitoes began to bite their damp skin. The occasional noise of passing cars startled them. Every time a luxury car drove by, Michael's heart ached as he remembered his black SUV, now comfortably parked in Emily's garage. In the silence of the early morning, Brenda complained of a sharp pain in her stomach from the cold and hunger. There was no medicine, no blankets, no hot water. Michael could only look at his mother with empty eyes. A feeling of guilt began to surface, but his massive ego quickly pushed it away, replacing it once again with hatred for Emily. He swore he would get revenge as soon as the sun rose. Dawn finally broke. The sunlight was blinding but offered no warmth to their hearts. Their bodies were stiff and sore. A musty smell emanated from their clothes, which had dried on them. People walking by looked at them with disgust, thinking they were the area's new homeless people. An employee who arrived to open the store shooed them away, throwing a bucket of water at their feet to make them leave. With their dignity in tatters, they dragged their belongings to a nearby park bench. As they sat there, enduring an ever-growing hunger, Jessica, out of boredom, opened her social media with the last of her data. Her eyes widened when she saw Emily's latest Instagram story, posted just 15 minutes ago. Jessica showed the screen to Michael and Brenda. It was a picture of a bowl of oatmeal with fresh berries and a steaming latte, with a clean, modern apartment in the background. In the corner of the photo, a small caption read, "The best breakfast is a parasite-free breakfast. Grateful for my blessings." Seeing the photo, Michael's stomach churned violently, not just from hunger, but from the envy and rage that erupted in his chest. Emily was enjoying life while they were suffering on the street, like trash. The reality of being without his wife's wallet was terrifying. The world was no longer kind, and they were just worthless specks of dust. Michael decided he couldn't give up. He still had a job. Yes, he was still a marketing manager at an office supply distributor. Though his position wasn't very important and his salary was mediocre, he often spent it on small online bets. He hid from Emily. He figured if he could get to the office, he could ask for an advance or a loan from a coworker to rent a temporary room for his mother and sister. He had to salvage what was left of his dignity as a man. He left Brenda and Jessica at the park, promising to return with money and food by lunchtime. With sheer determination, he walked the 2 miles to his office. He stopped at a public restroom and a gas station to wash his face and fix his hair. Though he couldn't get the musty smell out of his wrinkled shirt, he cleaned his muddy shoes as best he could with a wet paper towel. He looked far from a manager, but he had no other choice. Upon arriving at the office lobby, the receptionist eyed him with a frown. Normally, Michael arrived in impeccable clothes, smelling of expensive cologne, with an elegant air thanks to Emily's care. Today, he looked like someone who had just survived a disaster. Michael ignored her strange look and headed straight for the elevator. Inside, 2 employees from another department subtly covered their noses and whispered while glancing at him. Michael pretended not to notice, staring straight ahead, his face tense, his heart pounded, fearing his sudden poverty would be discovered. The moment he reached his desk, before he could even sit down, an employee from Human Resources was already there, her face serious. "Mr. Evans, the director and the head of HR are waiting for you in the conference room. Now," she said without smiling. Michael had a bad feeling. A sudden summons like this was never a good sign. With heavy steps, he followed the employee to the conference room at the end of the hall. Inside, the general manager and the director of HR were waiting, seated with a stack of documents on the table. Their faces were cold, without a trace of kindness. Michael sat in the indicated chair, trying to smile despite his trembling lips. "What's going on, gentlemen? It's unusual to be called in so early," he asked, trying to sound casual. The director slid a blue folder across the table to him. "Let's not beat around the bush. We've been conducting an internal audit for a week, and we've found numerous irregularities in the expense reports from the marketing team you manage." Michael's heart seemed to stop. He opened the folder with sweaty hands. Inside was evidence of embezzlement of operational funds, forged gas receipts, and even inflated invoices from client dinners that never happened. For a long time, Michael had been skimming small amounts of money from the company to maintain his lifestyle or pay off gambling debts. Before, whenever there was a discrepancy, Emily, who worked as an accountant at a prestigious firm that happened to be this company's external consultant, would often help him fix the reports or even cover the losses with her own money to save his career. Emily did it to protect her husband's reputation, but now that protective shield was gone. Clearly, Emily was no longer covering up Michael's dirty laundry. In fact, perhaps it was she who had tipped off the internal auditors to look more closely at his department. I can explain, sir. It's just a clerical error," Michael stammered, panicking. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. "A clerical error?" the HR director scoffed. $50,000 have gone missing in 6 months, and you call it a clerical error? We've already checked with the restaurants and gas stations you listed. All these receipts are fake. And what's worse, we've received information that you have been using company resources for personal purposes." "Mr. Evans," the director interrupted, his voice a firm thunderclap. "The company cannot tolerate this type of criminal activity. As of this moment, you are terminated for cause. You will not receive a single cent of severance, as the losses you caused the company are greater than any amount you are owed. And one more thing. If you do not return the $50,000 within the next 48 hours, we will take this matter to the courts. The police will come looking for you." Michael's world crumbled. Fired, no severance, threatened with jail time. He slumped in his chair, strengthless. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. It was over. The only livelihood he had left had just been severed. He tried to beg, even getting on his knees at his director's feet, crying and shouting, forgetting all dignity. But the decision was final. 2 security guards were called to escort him from the building. The scene of his eviction from the night before was repeating itself, this time at his workplace. Michael was walked out between the desks of his colleagues, who stared at him with surprise and contempt. Whispers followed him everywhere. The news of his corruption spread like wildfire. He was forced to collect his personal items in a cardboard box that once held instant noodles. There wasn't much of value at his desk, just a framed photo of himself posing with an air of success. As Michael exited the office building lobby with the box in his hands, he saw something that crushed his chest until he couldn't breathe. A luxurious silver sedan pulled up to the VIP entrance of the adjacent building, a much more prestigious business center. The car door opened, and out stepped a woman he knew all too well. It was Emily. But this was a very different Emily. She wore a stylish, modern-cut power suit. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she wore sunglasses that gave her a sophisticated air. She walked with confidence, accompanied by 2 assistants carrying her briefcase. Emily was on her way to a meeting with an important client. Her career was soaring. Michael wanted to scream her name, to run after her, but his feet felt glued to the ground. He saw his own reflection in the building's glass, disheveled, dirty, smelly, holding a cardboard box. Meanwhile, Emily shone like a freshly polished diamond. At that moment, Emily turned her head and glanced his way. Behind the sunglasses, Michael could feel a sharp, penetrating gaze. Emily didn't stop, didn't greet him, didn't even show surprise. She simply looked away and continued on her path into the skyscraper, leaving Michael paralyzed on the sidewalk, a complete and utter loser. The ruin of his career was the perfect complement to his suffering, while the woman he had despised was now flying high, unreachable. Michael returned to the park with heavy steps, as if dragging 100-pound shackles on his ankles. The midday sun beat down, burning the back of his neck. He clutched the cardboard box of his office belongings, a symbol of his failure. Along the way, his stomach wouldn't stop growling, twisting with hunger. But the hunger was nothing compared to the fear that now gripped him. He had to face his mother and sister empty-handed, with no money, no food, and worst of all, with the news that he was now an unemployed man with a criminal record at his former company. When he reached the park, he found a desolate scene. Brenda and Jessica were huddled on a bench with peeling paint. They looked like uprooted plants. Brenda was massaging her swollen feet, while Jessica fanned herself with a piece of cardboard, her face a mask of annoyance. When they saw Michael in the distance, their faces lit up for a moment. The hope of a sandwich and fresh water gleamed in their eyes. Jessica even jumped up, ignoring the pain in her foot, to greet her brother with an outstretched hand. But that hope was shattered when Michael arrived and dropped the box on the ground with a dull, devastating thud. He didn't dare look them in the eye. He lowered his head, staring at his once shiny leather shoes, now caked with dust. In a broken voice, Michael told them everything. His firing, the audit that uncovered his fraud, the threat of prison, and the fact that he would receive no severance. A dense silence enveloped them, a stark contrast to the bustling traffic on the street. And then the tears and fury erupted. Brenda screamed hysterically, heedless of the people passing by. She beat Michael's arm with what little strength she had left, blaming her favorite son for being so clumsy and stupid. She lamented her fate, having to live on the street in her old age, comparing her life to that of her friends, who were probably taking naps in their air-conditioned rooms. The insults poured from Brenda's mouth unfiltered the same harsh words she once aimed at Emily, now spewed at Michael. Jessica was no less cruel. She kicked Michael's box, scattering its contents. She insulted her brother, calling him a useless screw-up who only knew how to cause trouble. In this extreme situation, the mask of a united family they had always worn for Emily completely crumbled. There was no more love or mutual support. Only the survival instinct of selfish individuals blaming each other for their sudden poverty. Jessica blamed Michael for his corruption. Michael blamed Jessica and Brenda for their wasteful lifestyle that forced him to steal, and Brenda blamed them both for not finding wealthy partners who could support them. When the exhausting argument subsided, their energy spent and their hunger even greater, Michael made a desperate decision. He took off the brand name watch from his wrist, the only valuable item he had left since he was wearing it when Emily kicked him out. He also demanded the gold earrings Jessica was wearing. Though Jessica resisted and screamed, Michael and Brenda forced her, arguing they needed the money to eat and rent a cheap room. Finally, her face full of resentment, Jessica handed over her earrings. Michael went to a pawn shop, selling the watch and earrings to a street buyer. Without papers and desperate for quick cash, he sold them for a ridiculously low price, far below their actual value. Michael had no choice but to accept the cash, which was only enough for a few days of modest meals and a week's rent in a tiny room in a slum. That afternoon, they rented a room by the day in a narrow, muddy, and foul-smelling alley. The room was minuscule, barely fitting a thin, sunken foam mattress. The walls were damp and covered in mold, with no windows, only a small ventilation grate above the door. The bathroom was outside and shared with the other tenants, who eyed them with suspicion. For Brenda and Jessica, accustomed to Emily's luxurious and clean house, this place was hell. Brenda complained incessantly about the smell of dampness, the cockroaches, and the suffocating heat with only a small, dusty fan. That night, they ate cheap takeout. The atmosphere was grim, with no conversation. They ate greedily, consumed by hunger, but their faces reflected the hatred they felt for one another. After dinner, Michael tucked the little money he had left under his pillow, planning to use it the next day to look for odd jobs. Physical and mental exhaustion caused Michael and Brenda to fall asleep quickly, snoring loudly on the thin mattress. But Jessica did not sleep. Her eyes stared at the cobweb-filled ceiling, her mind a whirlwind. She looked with disgust at her mother and brother, sleeping with their mouths open. She felt she didn't deserve to be in this miserable place. She was young, pretty, and believed she deserved a better life. She hated Michael for failing as a provider and felt burdened by having to care for her mother, whose health was worsening from the stress. The whispers of selfishness began to tempt her. If she stayed with them, the money would run out in a week and they would starve together. But if she took the money for herself, maybe she could escape to another city, find an old friend, or find another man to leech off of. Slowly, carefully, so as not to make a sound, Jessica slipped her hand under Michael's pillow. Her heart pounded. She felt the envelope of cash and gently pulled it out. Michael shifted slightly, and Jessica froze in fear, but he just changed position and continued snoring. Jessica managed to get the envelope, quickly stashed it in her purse, and then silently packed her clothes into the black plastic bag. Without a backward glance at the mother and brother she was betraying, Jessica slipped out of the room and disappeared into the darkness of the alley, taking with her the family's only hope of survival. The next morning, Michael's screams shattered the neighborhood's silence. He woke up to find his pillow empty. The money was gone. He looked around. Jessica and her belongings were also gone. Brenda was startled awake by the screams. When Michael told her that Jessica had run off with all the money, she didn't believe it at first. She denied it, saying her beloved daughter could never be so cruel. But the evidence was clear. The door wasn't forced, and there were no signs of a break-in. It was obviously an inside job. Brenda broke down, crying inconsolably. This time, her sobs were genuinely heartbreaking. She cried out for Jessica, the daughter she had always spoiled, who had now abandoned her like trash to save herself. Michael, on the verge of a nervous breakdown, flew into a rage. He punched the damp wall until his knuckles bled. He cursed Jessica with the vilest words. The pain of being betrayed by his own blood was far deeper than being kicked out by his wife. At least Emily had clear reasons to hate them. But Jessica was one of them, a parasite now feeding on another. Their ruin was complete when the owner of the boarding house pounded on the door, furious about the morning commotion. Seeing Michael's state, the owner got scared and kicked them out on the spot. It turned out Michael had only paid a small deposit the night before, and since Jessica had taken the rest, they were evicted again. This time, they had absolutely nothing. Zero. Brenda could barely walk, her gaze lost. The shock of her daughter's betrayal had shattered her health. She was pale, covered in a cold sweat. Michael had to support his mother as they walked through the hot streets. In his desperation, Michael had a foolish idea: to go back to the only place that had ever been their home. He thought maybe Emily had calmed down, that she would feel pity seeing his mother's state. With their last bit of strength, Michael led his mother, walking for miles, back to the luxury community where Emily lived. They arrived at dusk, looking like beggars. The security guard recognized them and eyed them warily, but Michael pleaded that he just wanted to see the house from afar. They stood across the street. The house was dark and silent. Emily's car was not in the driveway. The lawn was impeccable, but something made Michael's knees buckle. A large sign was hammered into the fence. A yellow sign with huge red letters, "For sale. Contact number X." Michael's last hope vanished. Emily hadn't just kicked them out. She was erasing every trace of them by selling the house. It was empty. Emily was gone, taking her success and happiness with her, leaving Michael and his mother completely alone in a cruel world. Michael collapsed onto the asphalt, hugging his mother's knees and crying silently in the shadow of the house he once despised. For Emily, the days following the expulsion of Michael and his family were days of healing silence. No more shouts for coffee in the morning, no more of Brenda's soap operas blaring at full volume, no more complaints about the food or the laundry. The house became so quiet that Emily could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock and the rustle of the wind in the garden trees. At first, the silence felt strange, but it gradually became the blanket of peace she had craved for 5 years. The first thing she did was cleanse the house, literally and metaphorically. She hired professionals who sanitized every corner, threw out Michael's remaining junk, and replaced all the sheets, curtains, and rugs. She wanted to erase their scent, the smell of Michael's cigarettes and Brenda's overpowering perfume. Once it was clean, she contacted a real estate agent. She decided to sell it. Even though she had paid for it with her own sweat, there were too many bad memories within its walls. She needed a completely fresh start. The sale was quick. Within 2 weeks, the house was sold for a good price. With that money and her now untouched savings, Emily bought a luxury penthouse condo in the city center. It was smaller but far more modern, with strict security. From her window on the 30th floor, she could see the city lights, a symbol of her bright future. Her career also took off. Without the family drama draining her, she could focus 100% on her work. The major audit project she was leading was a resounding success. Her bosses promoted her to senior partner, which came with a company car, a personal assistant, and a much larger salary. Emily changed her style. The simple dresses she used to wear for fear of Michael getting angry if she bought new clothes were donated. Now, she filled her closet with elegant designer suits. Her face, once tired, now glowed. Her friends said she looked 10 years younger. For Emily, the divorce wasn't a failure. It was an operation to remove a malignant tumor, and it was saving her life. The divorce in court was a swift formality. Michael never showed up for the hearings, so the judge ruled in Emily's favor by default. When the judge's gavel fell for the final time, Emily didn't cry. She smiled in relief, thanking God. She walked out of the courthouse feeling light, as if chains had been removed from her ankles. That night, in her new apartment, while enjoying a cup of tea and a good book, she received a text from an unknown number. Normally, she would ignore it, but something told her to open it. "Emily, it's Michael. I'm texting from a stranger's phone. Please, help me. My mom is very sick. We're sleeping on the street. Jessica ran off with our money. I feel like I'm going to die. I swear I'll change. Let us come back. Is there any love left for me in your heart?" Emily read the message without expression. She felt no pity, no urge to help, only disgust at having her peace interrupted. She remembered how Michael had left her alone with a high fever to go fishing. She remembered how Brenda had thrown her cooking in the trash because it was slightly bland. She remembered the last slap. Love. That love had died, murdered by them, over and over again. Without replying, with a firm finger, Emily blocked the number and deleted the message. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. She imagined that in some dark corner, Michael was crying over his fate, but that was no longer her problem. Everyone is responsible for their own choices. Michael chose to be a lazy abuser when he had everything, and now he had to face the consequences of being a loser when he had lost it all. Emily took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air of freedom. She felt whole, strong. She realized she didn't need a man to be happy. Happiness was within her. That night, she slept deeply, without nightmares. She knew that tomorrow would be brighter, a path clear of parasites, a path to the true happiness she had built for herself. She had turned pain into strength, and her best revenge was being so successful and happy that the existence of her betrayers had become completely irrelevant. 1 year later, a lavish event hall in the city center was splendidly decorated. It was the grand opening of Emily's 5th boutique and the launch of the charitable foundation she had created to help women who were victims of domestic violence. A radiant Emily cut the inaugural ribbon with a genuine smile. She wore a dress she had designed herself, elegant and sophisticated. She was no longer the oppressed woman but a symbol of resilience and success. After the ceremony, a community outreach event began. The distribution of 1,000 food packages and a cash stipend to people in need. Emily insisted on handing them out personally. A long line of people waited patiently. Emily gave each person their package and an envelope with a kind smile, until it was the turn of a skeletal man pushing an old wheelchair. The man wore torn, dirty clothes. A pungent odor emanated from him. In the wheelchair sat an old woman in an even more pitiful state, her gaze vacant. Emily offered him the food package and the envelope. "Here you go, sir. May this be a blessing to you and your mother." The man didn't take the package right away. His trembling hand paused. He looked down, his eyes fixing on Emily's high-heeled shoes. Then, slowly, he raised his face. His sunken eyes met hers. Time seemed to stand still. Emily." His voice was barely a whisper. Emily looked at him closely. Despite the filth and suffering, she recognized the man. It was Michael, and the old woman in the wheelchair was Brenda. Her ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law were standing before her as beggars, waiting for her charity. Emily's heart beat steadily. She felt no anger, no resentment, not even pity, just a void, a complete indifference. They were like strangers. Michael had been expecting a reaction. Screams, tears, something. He wanted to fall to his knees, to beg for forgiveness, to tell her how sorry he was. But Emily did none of that. She gave a polite nod, her professional smile intact, placed the package and the envelope in Michael's trembling hand, and turned to the next person in line. "Please move along, sir. The line is long." Michael's heart shattered. Emily's indifference was the most painful punishment of all. To be invisible, to be irrelevant. A security guard came over and kindly asked him to move. Michael, stunned, pushed his mother's wheelchair away. Brenda was only concerned with reaching for the food. He stopped on the sidewalk across the street. He watched Emily get into a black luxury sedan. A chauffeur held the door for her. The car drove off, carrying her toward her brilliant life, without a backward glance. Michael opened the food package. Inside was rice, beef stew, and vegetables, the most luxurious meal he had seen in a year. He gave a spoonful to his mother and then ate some himself. The food tasted delicious, but in his mouth, it mixed with the salty taste of the tears streaming down his cheeks. He cried uncontrollably in the middle of the street, clutching the food box as if it were his only connection to the past. Regret had come far too late. He had thrown away a diamond for a handful of sharp stones, and now those stones had bled him dry. The door to forgiveness was closed not because it was locked, but because the owner of the house had moved into a much more beautiful palace. The perfect revenge is not anger, but to become so happy, so successful, and so peaceful that the existence of those who hurt you no longer matters in the slightest. Their ruin was just a small footnote in the thick book of her success.